So, very good afternoon, friends. And on behalf of my organization, CMS Vatavaran, we uh, welcome you all in this special session, Understanding the Process with Swati Thiyagarajan. Uh, Friends, as you know that today we are celebrating World Oceans Day, and we thought of talking to Swati Thiyagarajan. Uh, she is an Indian conservationist, documentary filmmaker, and environmental journalist based in Cape Town, South Africa, and yes, in New Delhi also. She is a core team member of See the Change project in South Africa and environmental editor at the Indian Television News Network of NDTV. Tyagarajan is also a recipient of Earth Heroes Awards and two Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award and Carl Zeiss Award. And then her work as an environmental editor at NDTV has been internationally acclaimed, and she has been described as the leading figure of environmental journalism in India. In 2017, she authored a book, Born Wild, which was based on her experience on the field as a reporter and a filmmaker. Uh, Swati was the associate producer and the production manager for the Netflix film My Octopus Teacher, which featured her husband as a human subject and his diving experience with an octopus in the Kelp Forest of False Bay of the western shore of South Africa. The film won Academy Awards for the Best Documentary Feature, and apart from Academy, it also won at least 20 other international awards, which I have the list, and I will certainly let you know about it later on. So, but let me first welcome Swati Thiyagarajan. Thank you, Swati, for becoming part of this session and accepting our invitation.
Thanks, Abhisachi. Nice to be on. Yeah.
So, Swati, as while we were discussing that the environmental journalism in India is not at par as the Western newspapers and TV channels, and probably you were the first to make it happen. What we are seeing, the environmental journalism in India these days, there are a very handful, environmental journalists in India like you and Bahar and some other, but it's not still becoming and not able to get its due like in the front page or being a main news thing. So how do you see these things here? Because why I'm asking you, because we have so many journalism and mass communication students joining us. So what do you want to tell them, like if they want to environmental journalist, what is the situation here in India right now?
So when I started out as an environment journalist, which was all the way back in 1997, at the time, there were some very good environment journalists in print media, but it was sporadic in the sense that I don't know if anyone had a specific environment beat that they followed. So it wasn't like there was environment news every day in the newspapers then, but definitely there was environment news in the print medium. And then NDTV was one of the first, or the first private news channel that started to broadcast. And we had Doordarshan, of course, at the time. And that wonderful program, Living on the Edge, was on Doordarshan at the time. So when I joined NDTV, I was very lucky because I joined an organization that was committed to environment stories. And that is the most important thing. I think the people come with a lot of passion, and people want to report on environment and tell conservation stories and tell environment and wildlife stories, but it depends on where you're placed, your organization, what their priorities are, and what kind of space they give you to do so. In 1997, even all the way through in the early 2000s, except for NDTV, really, nobody followed it in a very concerted way. In India, we followed it, we followed environment and as a beat. We had the programs on every week. We had news stories almost every day. And then Bahar, of course, started doing a wonderful job when she joined CNN IBN. And started, doing wonderful investigative reporting. So she's also very much a pioneer in terms of getting that established. And then Prerna, Bindra
Prerna,
Singh,
yes,
yeah, she did fantastic environment stories for the print. I have Neha Sinha has been doing some wonderful work. So there's some very, very brilliant contemporaries of mine, and then some people who came after who have all been doing wonderful work in this field. So, I can't say it's just me, but the biggest challenge is finding the medium that supports you. It's not a lack of stories. It's not for a lack of talent. It's not a lack of passion or interest. It's really finding the medium that allows it. And what I find quite heartening now is there are a lot of independent online news portals. And I think they are very much more sensitive and open to these issues and stories and ideas. And I think if you had a good story, a powerful story, an important story, I think you will find spaces in which to put that on, to be honest, So I think that's like really important. The other thing is that, Sabyasachi, it's like, I would tell people you have to have a passion for this. It can't be just something that you do. You can't choose to be a journalist and then do this as default. You can't scattershot yourself. You need to focus on this as a topic because it's a complicated topic. It's an involved topic. It's one of the very, very few fields in journalism where a story doesn't stand alone. I might do a story today on air pollution, which is a headline today, but it's a 20-year problem I'm looking at. So it comes with added information, research, understanding what laws were there, what are not there now, what are the new laws, what's happening, to have that kind of holistic background in any story that you do, and then put it out there, because then your story stands strong on its own. If you're in a press conference, say tomorrow, with the environment minister or who's, a forest officer or someone, you have enough background knowledge and information to ask the right questions and not just accept what they're saying as the right answers. So you can't do it as a scattershot. So if you want to be an environment journalist, if you want to be a conservation journalist, then that has to be your focus. Not just your focus. If you don't have a passion for it, if it is not something that truly is something that inspires you, that is what draws you, that is what you want to do, then it's not a field for you. Because it's one of those fields where it requires a lot of patience, it requires a lot of pushing, it requires a lot of travel, it requires a lot of research and reading and understanding of backgrounds and understanding of environment and conservation. So it's not an easy space into which where I can just go tomorrow and say, oh, I'm now going to go do a story on the environment. You can. I'm not saying you can't or you shouldn't. You may go do a story tomorrow on the environment, but that doesn't make you a conservation journalist. You've got to keep it, and it has to be like your career path. It has to be like your focus. That's why Bahar and Prerna and Neha and others, they're really good and respected and really well known, not just in India, but around the world because of that passion and focus. So that's very necessary. So it's two things: from the reporter side, the focus, the passion, the commitment, and from the medium side, the space that they give you to tell the stories. And I think especially now in where we are, and I say this all the time, I think we're in the most important decade of human history. And I'm not exaggerating. This next 10 years, 2020 to 2030, is going to be the most key decade, because this decade is going to decide the survival of the human species at large. What we put in place, the policies we can influence, the minds that we can change, the lifestyle changes that we can make, the decisions that we make every day today, the next 10 years, that will decide whether temperature rise is going to be over 2 degrees Celsius or not. That is going to decide if biodiversity loss is going to go past a tipping point. That is going to decide how well the oceans are going to do. It's really just going to decide the survival of the human species. So I think it's a very, very key time. And I think it's time now for more people to get into this field and to push really hard to get these stories out there.
Swati, one thing, when we talk about environmental journalism or conservation journalism, now the perception is that the environmental journalism is against the so-called development. So whenever we are any environmental journalism, something talks, it is against the government, it is against the public welfare projects which is going on in the area. So why is it so? And is this perception is correct? Is it so that environmental journalism means a tussle with the government each and every time?
Well, there's a certain amount of tussle involved. There's also has to be a certain amount of understanding that governments around the world, not just India, have their own agendas, and their primary agenda is the economy. So that is their driver, because we have set up a narrative today in this hyper-capitalist world that it's the economy that's going to save us. It's the economy that's going to bring people out of poverty. It's the economy that's going to change lives. It's the economy, it's the economy, it's the economy. Frankly, if you ask me, with what's happened in the last 2 years with the pandemic, the economy has not saved us. If anything, it's collapsed every single system that was there or put in place to try and help us. Not only has it collapsed that system, it has, the divide and the inequality has shown up so starkly now that we realize that this has been quite a false narrative, this idea that the economy has been helping vast numbers of people, you know, get out of poverty, or the economy. I'm not saying it hasn't. Of course, like if you take India, you know, many people did climb out of poverty, become either lower income, you know, middle class groups or middle class groups. I'm not negating the importance of the economy, but to make the economy the only important thing has been an extreme blunder. And I think in the world that we live now, we have to understand that all of our economic edifices, everything that we think we've created, stands on, it's only as strong as the ecological foundation that it stands on. The ecological foundation is key. The ecological foundation is absolutely what keeps us all alive and floating, because no matter what technology, what economy we talk about, every breath of air, every bit of water that we drink, every bit of food that we eat depends on the natural systems around us. So this idea that it's development versus nature is one of the most insidious stories that have been sold since the Industrial Revolution happened. We have been, or even maybe way back since the Agricultural Revolution happened. So we have been sold the story that if we talk conservation, we're automatically anti-people or anti-development, which I just find absolutely astonishing, because at the end of the day, when we talk conservation, it involves everything. It involves the well-being of not just the natural systems, but human beings, because we cannot forget that humans are very much a part of the natural system. We're not some species separate to the natural world. This is our home. This biosphere is our home. So when I say, you know, let's stop this practice to clean up air, I'm not talking about it in some silo vacuum. I want the air cleaned up so people, humans, can breathe clean air. You know, if I say this river is being polluted and the pollution needs to stop because of this tanning factory or that industry, I'm not saying it because, again, you know, it benefits me in any which way to say it. I am saying it for not just the fish and the flora and the fauna of the river. I am saying it for every human who lives around that river and uses that water, and every human that drinks that water. That is the basic fact of it. I am not anti-development and anti-people. I am for people when I talk about conservation. Where it could be perceived as anti-development is that I am saying, you know, this is polluting, or that is corrupt, or this is violating these laws. That's not being anti-development. That is sticking up for something that ought to happen naturally. You know, to make that last buck, to increase the bottom line, to increase the profit margins. If you're breaking laws, and if you're polluting, and if you are destroying rivers and forests and mountains, I'm sorry, that is a problem. That is not me being anti-development. That is development going the wrong way. And we've seen over and over and over again the result of that. You know, every time we've seen, I mean, you take the, you know, Chennai became this hub for car manufacturers at one time, and they gave indiscriminate land over to them, and they created all these factories, and all of this was done. Real estate was given indiscriminate licenses, and they went and built in areas which were natural marshes. The second runway at the Chennai airport was built across the overflow of the Adyar River, which used to flow there. Yes, it had dried up because of a drought. But when a natural event like that cloudburst happened, and that massive rainfall happened, and they had to, you know, open the dam sluices to let water out, Chennai went underwater, simply because all the floodplains, all the areas where the water would go, all the marshes that would absorb this water, all the waterways that would run free at one time were all blocked. Every single avenue that the water tried to go to was blocked. It was massive loss of human life, and it was a massive economic knockdown. I mean, those car companies lost millions and millions in just 2 days of terrible flooding and everything that happened. So every single time. It's like I'm doing something because I'm so short-term in my thinking when it comes to development. I just want to do this now. I'm not thinking that 3 days, 5 days, 5 weeks, even 5 years down the line, I've ruined the environment so much that any gain that I've made is not just going to be wiped out. I'm going to go into loss because everything's going to be wiped out. We've seen this in the cloudbursts that happen in Uttarakhand. We've seen it in forest fires that happen. We've seen it in the floods that have happened in Mumbai and Chennai. So this narrative that is being sold by a handful of few people who gain from the hyper-capitalist system, that conservation means anti-development. That's nonsense. Conservation just means asking people to help protect a biosphere because of which they are alive, full stop.
Yeah, very fiery words, and that's why we always love you for that, straight statements, which is absolutely true. Swati, now coming back to the journalism aspect again, you won 2 Ramnath Goenka Excellence in Journalism Award. Can you tell me a little about those, why those two? They must have some certain topics. So, on what topic you want both the time? And when it comes to reporting, because there are so many new journalist students are with us right now. So, what are the things that they should keep in mind while reporting the thing? What's our do's and don't do's?
Okay, so coming to the Ramnath Goenka Awards, I won 2 of them for 2 different stories, very interestingly. The one story was a very strong story on the illegal mining in Orissa, in Keonjhar, which was ruining the hundreds and hundreds of year old sal forests were being ruined there, and elephant corridors were being ruined, and it was completely polluted, and the elephants literally had nowhere to go and no food to eat. And so what they were doing then was decimating fields and eating crops. And they were literally the one small tribal hamlet I went to, out of 27 houses in that hamlet, 25 of them had literally elephant-sized holes in them, because every time they stored grain, the elephants would literally come and kick their way into the houses to eat the grain. And people were not even sleeping in their houses. Once sunset happened, they would go up and sleep on these caves on the side of the cliffs. They were that scared. And I spoke to an elder generation, like a gentleman who was, a grandfather. And also, so the younger generation couldn't understand in the last 10 years why the elephants they just thought these elephants were angry or violent. The older generation, who'd always lived with elephants, couldn't very much said that this was new, that the elephants had never been like this before. And it was very clear, because in the time that the elephants have become like this, you can see that, it went from 2-3 mines to 200 mines in that area, and most of them illegal. And so I did a strong story, and I confronted the Orissa government on this as well. And so that story won the Ramnath Goenka Award the first time. The second story that I did was almost like the opposite. I went to Kokrebellur in Karnataka, and I did a story on how the village there live and share spaces with the pelicans and painted storks that come there to nest seasonally. And this has been over 100-year tradition with this village. And the people there actively support the birds and look after them and don't cut the trees down so they have spaces to nest, and put up with, the birds screaming the whole day, bird droppings, bird babies. They even have a small rescue center there. And all this, of course, is wonderfully supported by, there was a Mysore Naturalist Society set up there. I think there was a lovely gentleman called Manu at the time who was doing a lot of work in this area. And thanks to him, and of course, thanks to the villagers, the birds were doing quite well. So 2 very different stories. One, which was very much, what you would call a hard-hitting conservation story, which could have been seen as anti-development and anti-government, which it wasn't. It was basically, the question I was asking is, why are these illegal mines being allowed to operate? And why is the government literally doing nothing, or the forest department doing nothing about the situation in Keonjhar? And the forest department, to give them credit, pretty much told me that there was nothing they could do, because the mining minister, every time they tried to do something, would just shut them down. So it was a problem. And the other story was how people and animals could share spaces and coexist. So yeah, for those 2 stories, I won. And then to go on to what you were asking, what to tell journalists. Yeah, I would say that, be sure of the story that you're telling. If you have a good story, tell it. Get your facts absolutely right. Very, very important to get facts right. No exaggeration, no bending the fact. Get your facts exactly right. Figure out who the best people are for your interviews and your sound bites. Definitely if they are talking about somebody or someone or an organization or a corporation that are breaking the rules, you must make the effort to get a counter response from that organization. That is just basic fairness in journalism. That is how it, that's the first tenet of journalism. Still doesn't mean that as a conservation journalist, you can't be strong on what you see is the problem, but you still get a response. And your personal integrity, don't do paid stories, don't go on a junket and report. Don't allow someone else to tell you what you should or should not be reporting, not even your organization, because unfortunately with a lot of organizations, TV, print, online much better because they're far more independent still. But still, I'm talking about TV and print, which depend heavily on advertising. And all of this advertising comes from various corporates. Often that's a big problem why your environment journalism stories get killed, because you could be doing a story on a corporate that is a subsidiary of someone who is advertising on your channel or is advertising in your paper. And that is a problem. So then you've got to have a medium or organization that has integrity. So to give NDTV credit, I've never been told to take a single story off air, even when we've been personally called by certain people and asked to take stories off air. Dr. Roy and Mrs. Roy have never done it. So I was lucky that I worked for an organization that had that integrity, but those are challenges, but your personal integrity is really important. So push as hard as you can, ask the right questions. And this is why I mean, read, research, know your facts, and be fair. And yeah, that's pretty much what I'll say, apart from the fact that, as I said, it has to be your passion. Otherwise, you're very quickly going to stop doing the stories.
Yeah, it has to be your passion if you want to be, even a good journalist or a filmmaker, whether it's a green filmmaker or human rights filmmaker or any filmmaker or any journal, you need to have the passion, that fire in you. Swati, as you know, today is World Ocean Day, and your film, My Octopus Teacher, it's a very beautiful film. It directly talks about the human relationship with the ocean. It's a very sad. I don't know about out of India, but in India also we don't have that much of uh, knowing about the ocean or a connection between us and the ocean. So you are working there and as a core team member for the sea change project in there, and working a lot for the ocean and the Kelp Forest. So want to know, like, how and when this film happened, uh, uh, because somewhere I was listening to you that it was uh, cracks, a journal going to the sea thing and then recording thing. So wanted to understand what was the point when Craig and you feel that now this is the time it is a subject of a film. So I wanted to understand that process, the thing.
So, so starting with oceans, let me just say that we live in a world that has a terrestrial bias. Because human beings live on land, we make land the most important environment or conservation or political or social or whatever it is that we do. There is a terrestrial bias. Considering over 70% of this planet is water or oceans, it's unfortunate that we have that terrestrial bias. To be honest, when I was in India and doing my environment journalism, I'll be absolutely, I was also very much part of that terrestrial bias, and most of my stories were in and around conservation and environment to do with land, not so much the oceans. One of the big challenges was access, because when you do a story, you don't phone a story in, which means I'm not going to sit in an office and call people around, and do a story based on phone calls. I have to be in the field. I have to experience what I'm seeing. I have to actually authenticate my own story. So unless I'm in the field and I see what's happening, I'm not just going to take someone's word for it. So that's another important thing when you're an environment journalist, is don't just take anybody's word for it. Go to the scene, see for yourself, make your own decisions. So that was a challenge, because obviously access to the oceans wasn't easy. So I did some ocean story, very obvious ones like plastic pollution, oil spills, illegal fishing, those kind of very obvious stories, of course. But anything bigger and deeper than that required for me to be in the ocean, to understand the ocean. When I was in India, I didn't have those skills, because my personal story is that I nearly drowned as a child. So I had quite a fear of water. So I wasn't somebody who was comfortable in the ocean. So even my stories about the ocean was limited. And I see that's fact even now around the world, is there is a limited, when it comes to journalism or conservation journalism, a lot more is about land, which is also, I understand, because more humans live here and there's more exploitation of land, and it's more obvious, as in you can see it. The actual ravages of the ocean are immense, 10 times worse than what's on land. We just don't see it because it all happens beneath the waves. So one of the descriptions I make of what's happening on ocean and land is, for example, when you took it industrial fishing in a big way. Let's imagine now you're standing over Masai Mara, and the migration is happening, and 2 million wildebeest are coming across the land. Now imagine massive helicopter gunships in the air, spotting these animals and throwing mega nets over these wildebeest and just dragging them up. That is what is happening to mass migrations under the water in the ocean, these massive ships everywhere with these mega nets. And they spot these things from with drones. The drone relates the satellite point to the ships, get there, they drop these mega nets, and they just scoop up all this fish, which is why most commercial fish species are today at a tipping point. Some of them are at a point of no return. Many ocean species are critically endangered. It's a mess. So we don't see it, so we don't relate to it the same way that we do land. Like, when it comes to, for example, when swordfish, you get sports fishermen who go out to hook swordfish. Imagine, so they throw the reel out there, and it's a big fight. It's a big, strong fish, the swordfish. It's a massive fish. There's a big fight with them, and then they finally get reeled and hooked in, and they, huge, get pulled onto the boat. I say it would be like me sitting in a safari jeep and throwing a hook out and hooking a leopard by the mouth and yanking it. It is the exact equivalent. Now, if we saw that on land, we'd freak.
Yeah.
We just don't see it in the ocean. Also, we don't see fish in quite the same way that we do mammals on land. So there's all of these biases that come in when it comes to the ocean. And the ocean it's like the blood that runs through our veins. The ocean is the blood, the living blood of this planet. It controls our weather systems, so heavily controls climate. It absorbs most of the carbon dioxide emissions that we put out. All the water that we have on Earth, every bit of water that we have is because of rain. And there's only one big source for rain, and that's the ocean. Every second breath you and I take, no matter where we live in the world, you could be in Delhi, but the second breath you're taking comes from the ocean. It's marine algae in the ocean that produces over 60% of the world's oxygen. So it's a critical key part, not part. It is 3/4 of this planet, and less than 10% of it is actually protected, and less than 3% of it is free of human activity. So it's quite a drastic situation, and there isn't enough attention being paid. There are, of course, fantastic filmmakers and conservationists and people working to save the ocean and really out there and putting their lives at risk and lives on the line to do it. That is happening. But in terms of news journalism, it's only now that the attention to oceans has really picked up in a big way. So when Craig started to dive here, which is our kelp forest here, which we at the Sea Change Project have called the Great African Sea Forest. So let me first say why that is, because now imagine you're standing in a wonderful forest on land, filled with birds and plants and animals and tall trees. Now imagine that entire space filling up with water, and you're underwater and you're like a bird and you can fly in any direction. That's what the Great African Sea Forest is like underwater. Millions and millions of animals, these tall kelp plants that look like trees. In fact, if you can see behind me, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
You know, that picture, that's what it looks like. That's underwater.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's this extraordinary ecosystem, and very few people are aware that kelp forests even exist. So one of the reasons that is because, again, it's underwater. Not everybody has access to go underwater, but kelp forests are found on 1/4 of the world's coastlines. So in any temperate and cold water ecosystems, you find kelp forests. They're some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on Earth. Being marine algae, they grow very fast, so they sequester a lot of carbon. They are nursery and shelter and feeding ground for many, many species. So they contribute to greater pelagic health. They're a nearshore ecosystem, so they prevent coastal erosion from big storm surges, from ocean level rises. It's an extraordinary ecosystem. They sequester more carbon than a tropical forest, they sequester more carbon even than a mangrove forest, for example. So they're very, very critical key ecosystems. So when Craig started to dive, it was a personal thing where he wanted to go in and actually just film and record for himself this ecosystem, to learn this ecosystem. So he went in there. We had no idea that there was going to be any film ever. And I'm talking about 2010, 2011 when he started to dive. And as he went into that ecosystem, and as he got more experienced, as he got to learn to track underwater, as he learned to see the animals and understand the animals, and he found new species, he found new animal behavior, brought out a lot of information about this wonderful ecosystem, and met his wonderful octopus. And even after he met her and he was filming at the time, there was still no idea that it was going to be a film. It was really a few years into that process that when he was looking through all his material, because we were trying to archive it and we were trying to label it and we were trying to sort of put it together, he did a book called Sea Change, the Primal Joy, or Primal Joy in the Art of Underwater Tracking with his colleague Ross. They set up the Sea Change project together. So when they did this book was when everyone looked through the material and it was like, oh my God, this is excellent. We have a story here that could potentially be a really good story. But even then, we had no budget, no backing, no nothing. Craig is an experienced filmmaker, of course. He's been a filmmaker for over 25 years. And, I think his films altogether have won over 100 international awards. But when he made this film, we had no budget. We didn't know who we would take it to. It was really a passion project. So Craig and I looked through a lot of the footage, realized we had something there. Talked about it a lot. And then Pippa came on board, our director, phenomenal creative person who's also was a conservation journalist, but she was very much a conservation journalist who worked on the oceans. So very, very skilled in the water, just like Craig was. And so we needed an independent eye to go through, because Craig was too close to the material and I was too close to Craig. And, it's very difficult to step back and look at it subjectively. You need an independent eye. We also had a wonderful executive producer, Ellen Windemuth, who has been Craig's friend for 30 years. She runs Off the Fence, this fantastic distribution company. And Ellen's done, years and years of conservation and wildlife films, and is an absolute pioneer and role model in that field. So she was on board. And then once she came on board, and with Pippa on it, and then James came on board, James Reed, the other director. And we had this sort of rough edit we put together, which is when Netflix came on board, liked what they saw. And Sarah Edelson, the executive producer at Netflix, also a fantastic, amazing person, came on board and really kind of championed this film. And they bought it as a Netflix global original. Mm-hmm. So once it became a Netflix global original, it automatically then gets translated into over 40 languages. It goes to over 90 countries. So it went out on Netflix in September. Mm-hmm. For us, for a small group being here in the tip of Africa, making a film on a ecosystem on the tip of Africa. That was the biggest we thought we're going to get. That's as big as it gets. It's on Netflix. It's a global original. Fantastic. We did not expect the absolute global explosion that this film then just created. As I was saying earlier, it's possibly because it was a very, very difficult, very funny, very weird year for humans at large on the planet. People had suffered a lot. People had lost their loved ones. People were isolating. People were disconnected. So maybe a film on pure connection and wildlife triggered something in people at the time, and created that wave. Who's to predict? Because who knows? I mean, wonderful films have gone out. Why is it that some films hit a certain note? So so it suddenly became really, really big. And it was in January then that Netflix realized that they had like a sleeper hit in a sense on their hands, like something that everybody was talking about, everybody was interested in, everybody was kind of like wanting to know more. So then they slowly, they got their PR and management and marketing on board, and they pushed and pushed and pushed with it. We just turned up for press conferences and stuff. We hadn't, like sitting in Cape Town, we didn't know anybody. What could we do? It's Netflix took that whole thing over and pushed it hard. And what was in our favor was the IMDb ratings were 8.8 or 8.9, which is very, very high for a documentary. And Rotten Tomatoes, we had 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. So when Netflix saw that, they realized that the general audience was also very, very, it wasn't just a wildlife or a conservation audience. We'd broken barriers and gone past that to a wide, wide, wide audience. So that kind of encouraged them then to start pushing it into various big ticket sort of award lineups. And we got nominated in a lot of the big things. We were absolutely stunned and shocked that we did, but we did. And then when we won the BAFTA and Oscars, of course, I don't know, we're still pretty zapped that we did. But
so, can you walk us through? Can you walk us through the moment when you got the news that you won Oscars? What was happening?
Yeah, so Pippa was at the Oscars, which was fantastic with James. She was in LA. We were here, and we had a computer on at night because the timings in America, so it was literally like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning for us here. So all were quite sleepy and tired, but excited. And we were watching on the thing. And when the first big sort of excitement was seeing, just to say, when they play out the nominated films, to see yourself on the Oscar stage and your film clip being played out in the nominations it's pretty extraordinary. And then the films we were nominated with, absolutely superb films. Each one of those films deserved to win. Mind-blowing films, really, so it wasn't like, oh, we had it in the bag or something like that, because any one of those films were absolutely spectacular and could have won. So when the announcement came, it was actually for about 2 seconds, I think everyone was so shocked, like we couldn't quite, it was like really, really a big shock. And then of course there was a lot of screaming and jumping up and down and all of that excitement, but it still feels a bit surreal. Actually, it doesn't feel quite real. So I don't know.
We in India are also very excited. We're still excited whenever we talk about Swati Thiyagarajan. Oh, someone from India is now having a documentary with one Oscar. So now what, Swati?
So now it's the Sea Change Project. Is essentially, our goal is the long-term conservation of the Great African Sea Forest. So we are essentially, we tell stories based very much in science and authentic experiences with deep immersion in nature to further this goal. And our big thrust is trying to get people to look at nature differently, trying to get people to understand that don't look at it as just a resource. Yes, it does wonderful things, oxygen and food and water and all of that, but it's so much more than that. It is so much more than that. It is entwined with the very soul of who we are as humans. Humans are nature. We are nature. We are as wild as any other wild animal on this planet. We are phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, kingdom Animalia. You can then go ahead and define yourself as whatever it is that you want to define yourself. That is a fundamental fact. And this is our home. So we want people to feel the same joy and passion and peace and wonder that we find when we're in the water. We're in the water every day. I'm also in the water now every day. The last 3-4 years, I'm in the water every day. And we film and we experience things, and that peace and joy and passion and inspiration that we feel, we want to inspire the same kind of awe in our audience. And we want people to feel that deep connection to nature. And it doesn't necessarily mean to the ocean. If you live in Delhi, feel it for the ridge, feel it for a tree in your backyard, feel it for a park next to your home, because there's so much life everywhere around you. There's so much happening, even in the middle of an apocalypse of air pollution and water pollution and, human population explosion in Delhi. Your average tree has squirrels, and it has pigeons, and it has parrots, and it has mongoose, and it has snakes, and it has grasshoppers, and it has so much life even now. So that's what we're trying to do through the Sea Change project, is bring people back to that awe and love and respect, to that deep immersion into nature, purely on a level of love, not for gain, not because it's a resource, not because it does this or does that, purely because it's this extraordinary ecosystem. All ecosystems are extraordinary, and they have intrinsic value in what they are. And we are very much entwined with that, because our health, our peace of mind, our immune systems, our everything is entwined with that. So that's the connection that the Sea Change project is really trying to get people to understand and to see the world a little bit differently from that perspective, to respect it for its intrinsic value. And of course we do a lot of science, and all our stories are based on science. So people have become aware of what is there, what is this forest, what are the animals, who are these animals, how do they live, how do they matter, where do they fit in the web of life, why is it important, all of that. So all of that is there, but our underlying thrust is to bring that very deep connection back. So that's really what we're working on.
So, Swati, before I open the floor for the questions to be asked by the participants, I had one question. Like today, for last 1.5 years, we are baffled by the situation which has been created by this pandemic. We are confined to our rooms, our flats. The social connection and the connection between man and environment, it was very less, but for last 1.5 years, there is no connection between outside and so human to human connection, human to society connection, and human to environmental connection is zero last 1.5 years. So post pandemic, how do you see the future of environment and biodiversity conservation scenario?
Well, if we haven't learned the basic lesson from the pandemic, which is biodiversity is key and incredibly important for our well-being, then I don't know what will teach us. The other thing that we should have learned from this pandemic is that we are only as strong as our weakest links. So nowhere in the world are you safe. So today, for example, the world can isolate India because, India is having a big pandemic problem. But until India gets healthy and India gets well, the world is not safe. The world is round. Something that happens in one corner of the world will find us in another corner of the world, because we're all connected. Everything, what goes around comes around, is absolute fact. So these are some of the realizations that we haven't made in this pandemic. Then, as I said, I don't know what's going to teach us. The other thing we all should have learned is just how vulnerable so many of our people are, the challenges that they live under, the smallest thing that can ruin their lives, the absolute and utter callous disregard systems seem to have for people who have no power, no money, no homes. Around the world, this pandemic has made inequality harsher. So if we don't bring massive social justice into all of our programs, from development to conservation, if we don't focus on that, we're going to lose the battle. So going forward, two things is, I think one thing that this pandemic should have done is made people more aware of, more interested in, and more committed and dedicated to wanting to do more conservation, to learn more about it, to want to save the environment. I think that would be a way to go. The other is to ensure that social justice is something that we don't lose sight of, because it goes hand in hand. It's just how it is. And I find that the more time you spend in nature, the more time you immerse yourself in nature, the more time you let nature into your heart, it makes you want to make connections with humans as well. It makes you want for humans to do well. It makes you want, because nature is so beautiful and it's so full of life and hope and so much possibility, that you want that for everybody. And whatever our differences might be, whatever we may classify each other as, however we might live, the ultimate truth is we are children of this planet. Nation states, borders, passports, visas, race, color, religion, caste, it's all rubbish. We're all children of this planet. We are one species. And I think if this pandemic hasn't showed us that we need to stand together to help each other, and if this pandemic hasn't showed us that we need a living, thriving ecosystem to help us cope with other pandemics that might come or prevent other pandemics from coming, I think, then there's no hope. We've lost the plot. But I always believe in hope, because I see it every day when I'm in the wild. And I can only hope that a lot of people who've gone through whatever it is that they've gone through will come out at the other end with more empathy, with more compassion, with a greater commitment to nature and a greater commitment to seeing humanity as a whole do a lot better.
Okay, thank you, Swati. And now I open the floor for questions. So, friends, all the participants, if you have any question, please feel free to ask. Raise your hand, unmute your mic, and then switch on your cameras and ask your questions. Any question? In the meantime, they are, they come up with the question. Swati, let me ask you something about your book, the born the born wild. So, like, why you decided to write that book? Because you already had the series, born wild series there, and then why you decided to have this book?
Well, so in the series, sometimes you're constrained by what you can put in and what you can't put in, because TV is a visual medium. So I can't talk about anything that I couldn't show visually or back up visually. So there were a lot of the stories that I'd done. There were bigger stories or bigger facts and bigger backgrounds behind those stories, which obviously I couldn't put in the story. So the book was an opportunity to write it from that personal point of view of how those stories came to be, why I chose to do what I did, and why I had the passion to do what I did, and to tell the bigger story of all the stories that I'd done on the news. Plus, it gave me an opportunity to sort of compare and contrast Africa and India, the conservation challenges, issues, rules, laws, etc. I could bring both together and sort of balance them out in the book. So that was also another reason why I wrote the book. So yeah, plus, when I did Born Wild, that was a while ago, and there's a whole new generation out there that may not have seen it, may not have access to it. So perhaps they have access to the book. So that was another reason.
One question which is coming from Abhishek Kumar. Ma'am, while covering some stories which are revealing some fraudy of politicians is always life-threatening for journalists. So how can we manage the situation?
Yeah, that is a problem, especially when regimes or places where governments turn more and more authoritarian and you have less and less ability for free speech. It's a major, major problem. I know in India, in fact, the last sort of freedom of press index showed that Indian journalists are perhaps some of the most threatened in the world. Least amount of freedom. It's just been shrinking over the years, and it is a problem. And I would not blame or condemn or point fingers at anyone who feels nervous or doesn't want to risk it to do these things, because it takes a lot of fortitude to face that level of powerful criticism or threats that can come your way. I know a lot of journalists who still do it and risk their lives. Amazing, more power to them. Again, when I was reporting in India, it was at a time when there was less sort of thin skins, let me put it that way, where people didn't get that threatening. Or you did. I had some threats sometimes from sand mafia once, and from the coal when I did the mining stories. I had a few problems, but that was more like a random person or someone, and it was more like a warning threat. Usually when they warn you, you know that's just a threat. It's when they don't say anything and come after you that is actually more kind of worrying in a sense. But if you have the government come after you, and if they throw stupid laws against you like sedition and anti-patriotic and all this thing, and then you're up against a lot. And then if you don't have the systems to protect you from the courts downwards, police, it is a major problem. And I actually don't have an answer for that, because I think it comes down to an individual's fortitude and how much they want to risk for a story they want to tell.
Anukosha Jain, you want to ask a question? Kindly ask. Anushka, sorry.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask that there's some that India is not safe for women, they can't go outside. Like we heard about all these, so you have already done some fieldwork. So is it true that it might be difficult for women to go out and search about all this, and they are highly suppressed by all the politicians that you mentioned?
Yeah, it is. So even when I started in 1997, one of the big, so I was lucky again, I was in NDTV. So NDTV gave women journalists a lot of encouragement and space in which to grow. In fact, we got encouraged to step out and, do our stories. So not within the organization, but often when I'd go in the field or I'd travel or whatever, I got this pushback, you're a woman and how can you be traveling on your own, or are you married, or, what are you doing here, or isn't it safe? And, all this stuff, especially because a lot of the environment stories are in pretty remote areas and in areas around the country. And it's not easily accessible areas that you go to do these stories. I had a wonderful team, but we were an all women's team for a long time. We were safe. In fact, if anything, I find rural India quite safe. You follow a few rules. You don't go there and get in their face and try and push your values onto them. They may have their own traditions and cultures and values, and you respect that. You don't get in their face and and I find that as long as you are respectful, and it might be galling. For example, whenever I was in rural India or I was doing my stories, something as simple as how you dress as a woman. I know it's oppressive and it shouldn't happen, and there should be no gender bias in an ideal world, but we don't live in an ideal world. So when I used to go to these places where I knew it was really isolated or very traditional people, then I was always in my kurta. I had a dupatta. It cost me nothing, to be dressed in a kurta and dupatta. What statement was I going to make standing there in some t-shirt and jeans or whatever, right? I was there to do my story. So if it helped me not have a problem with locals and not have a problem with anybody, then that's what I did, because my story was important. But yes, there is a definite pushback that comes when you're women. And, India, unfortunately, as much as I love India and I've had wonderful, wonderful experiences, and it is the home of my heart, it is not a safe country for women in many, many ways. And yeah, so as I said, know where you're going, have a good local contact, make sure the company or whoever it is that you're doing the story for has your back. As I said, don't go somewhere and just be respectful of people's traditions and cultures, and just focus on doing your story. And you'll find invariably most people, I must say, most people are very kind, very welcoming, especially in rural India. Everybody will want to feed you. People are actually quite concerned you're a girl on your own, and they'll be like, no, like we'll go with you there, or we'll make sure someone looks after you or whatever. So that's also there, which is very beautiful. So yeah, it's a balance between all of these things.
Okay. We had question from Rahul Mandal. Rahul?
Yeah. So ma'am, you have talked about a lot of films on the oceans. So, and all those things available in nature. So I have a simple question here, that is, how we journalists can play a role in conserving all the things available in nature, like our oceans, our forests, everything, our whole biodiversity.
Okay,
So
thank
you
you.
mean to say, how do you play a role in conserving biodiversity as a
Yeah,
journalist?
yeah,
Is that what you're asking?
yeah.
Well, that's, yeah, your job as a journalist is to make people aware. Because the first step towards any level of commitment, public commitment, or any movement towards changing policy, or any kind of public support for policy to help conservation, comes from people being aware of what there is, of what they stand to lose, of what the challenges are, why that ecosystem is important, what kind of biodiversity exists. So that's our first job, is to make people aware. So the more stories that are done, the more stories that expose ecosystems, the more stories that show the wonder, the beauty, the hope of those ecosystems, the more solutions we show along with the problems and challenges that we're showing, the more public support we can get for those stories, the more we can influence policy, because then automatically when you get public support, then the government tends to take something seriously, because obviously their votes matter at the end of the day. So your first primary job is to tell the stories, increase the awareness, make people connect to what is important, and then the rest will follow.
Okay, great. Chirag Jha, you have some question? Please go ahead.
Yes. Hello, ma'am. Myself Chirag Jha, and I'm currently pursuing journalism from University of Delhi. I have personally felt that there are very few news portals or organization who have a separate section for environmental news. Let it be BBC or the Daily Guardian. And I don't know any of Indian news organization who have a separate section for environmental news. So it's that audience are not interested in reading such news, or our media organization feels that such news are worthless.
Yeah, I don't think there's an audience problem, to be honest. I think people, especially now with climate change, biodiversity loss, and everything that's happening, if you notice, they've done a survey, I think in the last few years, they find that wildlife and environment and nature programs have a greater audience than most other programs. I mean, so people are very, very interested. People are there is an audience. It's not like there isn't an audience. What it comes down to, as I was saying, was the medium that you're trying to do the story through. It could be because these stories are expensive to do. It involves travel, it involves getting to a place, it involves getting the story, it involves publishing the story. So that's one. These stories are expensive to do because they're not, you can't just make a phone call and do the story. The other problem is, as I said, depending on your organization, they could have sponsors or a board or an editorial board or whoever whose bottom line will get affected if you did certain stories because of whoever they're being sponsored by. And the third problem is, of course, access. So with these three things, it's a challenge. But as I said, there are a lot of online portals that are interested, and I personally think it comes down to also the strength of the story. It's how well a story is told. If you have a really good story and you tell it well, you will find an audience and you will always find someone who wants to publish it. In terms of a dedicated column or a dedicated weekly sort of news which centers around conservation, it's how you again sell that idea and sell that story. How do you convince your editor that the stories you have to tell about the environment are interesting, engaging, important, will bring an audience to that column? That is the skill of the person trying to tell the story and the kind of story that you're trying to tell. And that's the skill that we need to develop. How well do we tell these stories in order to get our channels or our papers or our online portals to publish what we're doing? The other thing I will say is cultivate, if you do your reading and research, cultivate a circle of people. When you do reading and research, you will start realizing which scientists are working in which field, which conservation biologist is where, who in, which conservation organization is working on something. That gives you a lot of advantage because then you start, even if you're not doing a story, get in touch with them, understand their work, figure out what they're doing, because down the line, when you need to do a story later, they can help you. If you can't get somewhere for access, they can help you with of who you can interview, knowledge, background, science. So that's why I say it's a very, very important field that requires a lot of focus and dedication. It cannot happen just as scattershot. It's all these sort of contacts that you need to cultivate. They need to take you seriously. For them, for a scientist to take you seriously, you better know what you're talking about, in which case you better have your reading and research and your facts right. They're not going to suffer fools lightly. And you need to know that this is your passion. You need to focus on it. It has to be something that you do. This has to be what you do. Then you can start telling your stories better, have the contacts that you do, and push harder to get these stories heard.
Now,
Thank you, ma'am.
Shreya Mishra has a question. Shreya, her question is, ma'am, what about first world countries? Mainly, they are responsible for climate change.
This is true. There's no doubting that first world countries are massively responsible for most of the carbon up in our atmosphere. Doesn't mean that we haven't caught up pretty fast and aren't adding our share of carbon. And it is fact also that first world countries, a lot of them have compromised their biodiversity, while countries like India and many countries in Africa that have so many challenges have done a much better job of keeping their biodiversity intact. But I don't know how much of that is accident and happy coincidence in terms of just local communities and people being more patient and actually wanting biodiversity to stay intact, as opposed to not having a big push through capitalism or development or infrastructure or whatever. So yes, first world countries are, and which is why you'll notice in a lot of these meetings, like the COP meeting that will come up in Glasgow later in the year, the big fight is between how do you allocate responsibility, and if you're allocating responsibility, shouldn't polluters pay first, which means the countries historically responsible for majority of the carbon emissions, which allowed them to become the economic powers that they are, shouldn't they have a greater financial burden? Shouldn't they bear a greater financial burden? And that is a fact, and that is very important. That's one of the things India has fought a lot for in COP, and that is something that is fact. But having said that, just for India and for the people of India and where you live, if you're not able to breathe the air, and if you're not able to drink water from your river, and if sewerage is mixed with your groundwater that's drinking, if pesticides are in your food, that is your problem. It doesn't matter at that point if America has emitted more carbon or not. You're facing the health consequences in your own country. So locally, that is your problem. And locally, that is what you need to change. Globally, it will take care of itself. Where you are, what you see, what the problems are, those are what need to be tackled.
Oh, okay. The last question, Victoria Sangma, would you want to ask your question? Hello. Okay, her question, ma'am, can you share the difference between your experience in journalism in India and in international level like South Africa?
Okay, so I can't say, again, maybe I've just been lucky. I can't say there's been a vast difference in experience. In fact, I find India has actually more people who are really interested and committed and do fantastic work. And our scientists are brilliant. Our filmmakers in India are brilliant. Our conservationists are brilliant. India has an absolute astounding lineup of gifted, dedicated, passionate, wonderfully talented people working in all these fields. So it's an absolute joy, actually, in many, many ways to get in touch with them and to do stories. But the flip side of that is, yes, the freedom of speech problem, which is if you were doing a really strong investigative report that is pointing fingers at certain companies or implicate certain political shenanigans and stuff, there's definitely more pushback. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Believe you me, you could be anywhere in the world, and if you point fingers at certain powerful people, you are going to get massive pushback. So India is not unique in that. I have conservation journalist friends around the world who've had massive threats and massive pushbacks. In South Africa, what's been interesting is I didn't grow up here. So I'm not as entrenched in what is happening here as I was in India, because that's where I grew up. So it's a bigger learning curve for me here. Understanding the laws here has been a bigger learning curve. Understanding how the culture here works has been a bigger learning curve. Understanding how communities look at things and not look at things. For example, one of the things in South Africa, which will never happen in India, is we have a lot of trophy hunting here, and private people are allowed to own animals and private habitats, which you don't have in India. So that's a very different approach to conservation here. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. So, it's understanding all these things. So just different places, because of the way they work, come with different challenges, I would say.
Wow, that was wonderful talking to you, Swati. We had so many questions, and we should, go at least 2 more hours. But you also have to go to some other program, and
Yeah.
we had a limited time
Yeah.
here. So it was really wonderful talking to you. Thank you once again to accept our invitation and coming to this special session. And best of luck for your all the future endeavors. And we hope to see more documentaries and books and work from you in coming years. Thank you very much, Swati.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, friend, this was Swati Thiyagarajan, and uh, as you know, that she was talking about her film and her journalism career. Friends, I had given you feedback form link, and this link will be live for 2 hours. So go fill the form and send it to us so that we can be able to generate certificate. It was really wonderful to have you here. But before I, close the session, let me express my gratitude to few of the people who are behind this wonderful program. First, I want to express my gratitude, my team's gratitude to our Director General, Ms. Vasanti, P. N. Vasanti ma'am, who had given us all the courage, and she is the energy behind all these programs which CMS Vatavaran is doing. So thank you, ma'am, for uh, trusting us, trusting on our visions, and letting us free hand to organize these kind of programs. Then I want to express my gratitude towards our program partners, that is Canadian High Commission in India and the European Union in India. Friends, I will also like to express my gratitude and my thanks to my team, which is behind the scene, which you are not able to see because you are just watching my face. But there is, I want to express, I want to give thanks and want to congratulate my team, Preeti, for having all the work, what she is doing, organizing, contacting all the schools and colleges, and you. Uh, Thank you, Kavita Rakeja, for all the work she is doing every time. Like if we are missing something, she let us know that look, you are missing this, and I know that we worried you a lot these days. You had so much of work with you, but still you never say no to us. Thank you, Kavita. Thank you, Suraj. Suraj is the person who is looking all the technical thing which behind the scene. Thank you, Suraj, for all your work. Thank you, Rajkumar. He is taking care of all the database and all these things. He is helping us in so many things. So thank you, Rajkumar. And I also want to express my thank to Jia. Jia is the person who designed who is a designer, and all the beautiful posters and all these things which you are seeing is due to Jia. So thank you, Jia. Uh, my sincere thanks to Dipendra ji and Gaurav Bhatia ji, because they are the technical team who is looking behind all these emails and everything, and helping students to make this series very smooth. Uh, and so thank you, team. And I want to express my gratitude to all the participants who are here. And I'm seeing so many names: Amanya, Abhishek Kumar, Alvira, Aman, uh, Aman Chaudhary, Aman Vidyarthi, Amritanshu, Anirudh. There's so many names: Amol Chaudhary, Anurag Sharma, Anushka Dayal, all and then all the rest of the participants. So I'm unable to take a name. There are so many names. Thank you for trusting us and be a part of this 1 hour special session with Swati Thiyagarajan. And again, I had given you, friends, the feedback form link. Go through the link, fill the form, and we will be very soon sending you the participation certificate. Friends, you can also participate at 5 o'clock. We have another session to a live questions session with one of the most prominent name in the environmental filmmaking in India, and he will be live questions session for with us at 5 o'clock. So please do join us on our Facebook and YouTube channel for having another live questions session with another prominent filmmaker, green filmmaker of our time. Thank you once again. Hope to see you in the evening session at 5 p.m. again. Thank you very much, friends. Have a great day.